You don't bet on a hand you know is rigged. And you sure as hell don't let someone think they can play you for a fool. My name is Vincent Fitzgerald, but most people call me Vin. I'm 48 years old, and I run the kind of poker game that isn't listed on any casino schedule. It's the kind you find through whispers, a knowing nod at the right bar, a text from a number that disappears the next morning. High stakes, no second chances, and no room for amateurs. My father, a man who could read a bluff before a man even picked up his chips, taught me that the world doesn't run on luck. It runs on knowing the angles. The Sterling Club was my domain. Dim lighting, deep leather seats, and the scent of whiskey and sweat mixing in the air. Men sat around the table, eyes sharp, fingers drumming on green felt. A real game wasn't about the cards. It was about knowing the man across from you. Reading his tells, watching the way his fingers hesitated at the edge of his chips, the way his jaw clenched when he bet big. Control was everything. You let one crack show, and the whole table would eat you alive. That's why I spotted it right away when something was off with Lillian Fitzgerald. Blonde curls, summer dresses, a laugh that used to turn heads across the room. She was quick with words, but quicker to avoid the ones that mattered. Lately, she'd been moving different. A little too eager to leave the house, phone always tilted away when I walked in, a nervous energy in her step, like she was waiting for a trap to spring. I'd seen that look before, just not from my wife. I didn't say anything at first. There was no point in accusing someone when you didn't have all your cards in front of you. Instead, I waited. I watched. Patterns always tell you the truth, and Lily's patterns had changed. The final proof came in the form of a crumpled receipt in the glove compartment of her car. La Reserve, 2 guests, red wine, filet mignon. A place I'd never set foot in with her. Lily wasn't a wine drinker. She preferred cocktails, something with too much sugar, and a name she had to spell out for the bartender. That wasn't her order. That was someone else's. I sat in the driver's seat, rolling the receipt between my fingers. A few years back, a guy named Manny Vega sat at my table, thought he could run a short con on a drunk tourist. He swore up and down it was just a misunderstanding, but the thing about a bad liar is that they don't know when to shut up. The more they explain, the more guilty they sound. I wondered what Lily's story would be, but I didn't ask her. Not yet. Instead, I made a call. Raymond Larson owed me a favor, and in my line of work, favors were worth more than cash. He was a private investigator with a bad marriage, a drinking problem, and the kind of nose that could sniff out dirt before a man even thought to step in it. He picked up on the second ring. Vin. Been a while. His voice was rough, like he'd been up all night, which was likely. I need some eyes on someone, I said. A pause. Then, personal or business? Personal. Raymond whistled low. That bad? Find out and tell me. Send me what you got. I took a picture of the receipt, sent it over, then leaned back against the headrest. The night stretched outside the windshield, neon lights flickering over the sidewalk. I'd sat across from men who would bet their last dollar on a losing hand, convinced they could bluff their way out. I never respected those kinds of players. A smart man knows when he's already lost. A week later, Raymond met me at Mackey's Bar, a quiet dive on the edge of town where nobody asked questions and the beer was always cold. He slid into the booth across from me, set a folder down, and signaled the waitress for a whiskey. Got what you need, he said, pushing the folder forward. I flipped it open. There she was, Lily, stepping out of a black sedan outside a small art studio near the docks. A man was holding the door for her. Younger, dark-haired, wearing a paint-stained shirt like he was too good to dress like a grown man. Jason Newton, Raymond said. Runs a little gallery on the east side. Does commissions for rich women who think slapping paint on canvas is a personality trait. Been seeing her for at least a month. They meet Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually an hour or two. That restaurant receipt? They were there last Friday. Same guy. I stared at the photos. Lily smiling, leaning in. Her fingers brushing his arm. Familiar, intimate, the kind of touch you don't give to a stranger. Raymond watched me carefully. What's your move? I shut the folder, slid it back to him. You keep this. You don't want copies? I shook my head. I don't need them. I'd seen all I needed. The pieces were already moving. That's the thing about poker. You don't react when someone plays a bad hand. You let them keep betting. You let them think they've got you, right up until you turn over the winning card. And Lily? She'd already gone all in. She just didn't know it yet. Sunday brunch at the Harbor View was the kind of event Lily lived for. Polished floors, linen napkins folded just so, the kind of place where the waitstaff moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. A restaurant for people who like to pretend their lives were elegant and under control. It was also the perfect stage. I made sure everyone she cared about was there, her closest friends, a few colleagues from the firm, even her sister who barely made time for family gatherings. I kept it casual when I suggested it earlier that week, acted like it was just an idea that popped into my head. Haven't done brunch in a while. Bring whoever you want. She agreed easily, smiling like she thought things were normal, like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back. By the time we arrived, I could already see the ripples forming. Whispers passed between the other guests, subtle looks exchanged. Phones buzzed on tables. Some people looked down at their screens, others flicked their eyes toward Lily and back again, trying to hide their reactions. She hadn't noticed yet. She was too busy putting on a performance. God, it's beautiful today, she said, shrugging off her cardigan, acting like this was just another Sunday. I was thinking we should finally take that weekend trip to Cape May. Molly's been asking to go. I nodded, sipping my coffee. We'll see. She glanced at her phone, frowning at the screen, probably noticing the flood of messages she wasn't expecting. Her fingers tightened around the glass of orange juice she hadn't touched. I let it sit. Let her stew. The best way to watch someone fall apart is to let them think they might still hold the pieces together. Across the table, her friend Dana leaned in, voice just a little too careful. Lily, did you see what's going around? Lily blinked. What? Dana hesitated, then turned her phone around. The color drained from Lily's face so fast it was almost impressive. There it was, right in front of her, the pictures. Her and Jason at Law Reserve, heads tilted close, the kind of image that didn't need explanation. A second one, clearer. Her hand on his wrist, his on her knee. The caption beneath? Not the kind of team-building exercise her job had in mind. For a second, she didn't move. Her grip on the glass tightened until I thought it might shatter. Then she jerked back, fumbling with her phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled. What is this? She let out a nervous, breathy laugh, the same kind she always used when she was caught off guard. Where did this come from? Dana pursed her lips. You tell us. Lily turned to me then, her eyes wild, searching my face for something, maybe panic, maybe anger, maybe a way out. I gave her nothing. Just a calm, steady look as I cut into my steak. Vin, her voice was lower now, urgent. Did you? Did I what? I set my knife down, wiped my mouth with the napkin, and finally, leaned in. Did I find out my wife's been screwing around with a two-bit artist on the side? Yeah, I did. The table went dead silent. Even the waitstaff froze, sensing the kind of moment that didn't need an audience. Lily shook her head, her whole body rigid. You don't understand it. I cut her off, my voice even, measured. I understand plenty. I understand you thought you could sneak around and not get caught. I understand you lied every time you said you were working late. I understand you played a bet you couldn't cover. I tilted my head. That about sum it up? She swallowed hard, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. I could see the fight in her, the way her mind scrambled for a defense. But there wasn't one. The damage was already done. Dana looked down at her plate, shifting uncomfortably. Her sister, Margaret, stared at her with something close to disgust. At the far end of the table, one of her work colleagues muttered something under his breath and got up, shaking his head as he walked away. Lily's breathing was shaky now, her fingers twisting together. She was unraveling, and she knew it. I leaned back, stretching an arm over the back of my chair. I suggest you finish your meal, sweetheart. This might be the last time you eat in a place like this for a while. She sucked in a breath like I'd slapped her. I stood, tossing a few bills on the table before looking at the rest of the group. Pleasure seeing you all. Enjoy your brunch. Then I walked out. Calm. Controlled. Because in the end, I wasn't the one who had something to be ashamed of. She was. And the whole damn world knew it now. Lily didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. She'd have to be out of her mind to try and face me after what happened at brunch. Instead, I got a message from her around midnight. Just one line. We need to talk. I didn't respond. By morning, the damage had spread. The photos were everywhere, circulating through her office, slipping into the hands of the right people. It didn't take much. Just a few well-placed messages, a couple of anonymous emails. I didn't need to explain anything. People love a scandal. They'll put the pieces together themselves. By noon, I got a call from an old friend at the firm. You really did a number on her. She did it to herself. He chuckled. Yeah, well, you should know she's on leave. probably won't be back. I hung up without responding. I wasn't interested in hearing the details of how she'd been blindsided at work, how she'd tried to spin it and failed. That wasn't my concern. My concern was the next move. Jason Newton had walked into my life without knowing the rules. That was his mistake. He thought this was just another story, some romantic tragedy where the heart wants what it wants. But the thing about men like Jason is they don't understand consequence. They don't understand that in the real world, playing a bad hand gets you burned. I drove out to the studio that afternoon. The place was in an old brick building near the docks, second floor, big windows smeared with paint. I took my time walking up the stairs, letting the old wood creak under my weight. I wanted him to hear me coming. When I pushed open the door, he was sitting at a canvas, brush hovering mid-stroke. He turned, startled, dark eyes flicking from me to the exit like he was already thinking about running. Smart, but not smart enough. You got a minute? I asked, stepping inside. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I don't know what she told you. She didn't tell me anything, I said. I figured it out on my own. I glanced around. Paintings leaned against the walls, portraits mostly, abstract nonsense mixed in. One caught my eye. A woman, blurred at the edges, bathed in soft gold light. I recognized the tilt of her head immediately. You paint my wife? I asked, my voice casual. Jason licked his lips. Look, man, I didn't. I took a step closer. He flinched. I kept my hands in my pockets, kept my tone even. No reason to make a scene. Yet, I'm gonna make this real simple for you, I said. You pack up whatever you need, you get in your car, and you leave town. Tonight. His breath came quick now, chest rising and falling too fast. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I laughed. That's supposed to mean something to me? She came to me. You just what? I cut him off, leaning in, lowering my voice. Just figured since she was someone else's wife, she didn't count? Just figured you could play a game you didn't know the rules to. He shook his head, hands gripping the arms of his stool like they'd keep him upright. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. The air between us hung thick and silent. He knew it was over. Knew there was nothing he could say that would fix this. You've got till sunrise, I said. If I see you around after that, we're gonna have a different conversation. I turned to leave, then paused, glancing at the painting of Lily again. You might want to rethink who you turn into, Art, I added before walking out. I didn't have to look back to know he was already reaching for his phone, booking whatever ticket out of town he could find. He was a man who never planned for trouble. The kind that runs the second they realize they've walked into it. The Rusty Anchor was the kind of place where bad decisions got made. Dim lights, sticky floors, the scent of spilled beer and fried food baked into the walls. A joint for men who'd lost at the tables, lost at life, and needed a dark corner to drink in. It didn't surprise me that Jason had come here to lick his wounds. I spotted him as soon as I walked in. He was hunched over the bar, fingers tied around a half-empty glass, eyes darting between the door and his reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. He looked like a man waiting for something to explode. Good. I took my time, letting my steps echo across the floor as I approached. He stiffened when I pulled out the stool next to him, but he didn't turn. Didn't figure you for a whiskey man, I said, glancing at his glass. His jaw twitched. I'm not. I nodded toward the bartender. Same as him. The guy behind the bar poured, then backed off quick. He could feel the tension, and he wasn't getting paid enough to get in the middle of it. Jason shifted, finally turning his head just enough to look at me. I left the studio, he said. Took what I needed. Good. I picked up my drink, rolled it between my fingers. Now you're going to take yourself out of town. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This is insane. No, I said, taking a slow sip. What's insane is thinking you could walk into a man's life and take what's his without paying the price. His fingers tensed around the glass. She isn't a thing, Vin. She made her own choices. I set my drink down carefully. You think I don't know that? I turned toward him, my voice dropping lower. You think I don't know she's the one who stepped out? That she's the one who wrecked her life? He swallowed, throat working like he was trying to find the right words. I don't give a damn about what she did, I said, but I do care about who she did it with. And you? You were dumb enough to let yourself be part of it. I tilted my head. And now you're paying for it. He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. Jesus. You talk like some mob boss. I smiled. Nah. I just don't let people walk all over me. Jason looked down at his drink, hands shaking. I was gonna leave anyway. I slid a napkin toward him, scrawled with an address. Bus station. First one out of here is at 6 a.m. You're on it. He stared at the napkin like it might burn him. And if I'm not? I leaned in, lowering my voice to something just above a whisper. Then I make sure your life here becomes real and comfortable. His breath hitched. I could see the fear sinking in now, real and heavy. He nodded. Good talk, I said, tossing a few bills on the bar and getting up. Enjoy your last drink in this town. As I walked out, I didn't need to look back to know he was already pulling out his phone, searching bus schedules, figuring out how fast he could disappear. Some men fight. Others fold. Jason was always the folding kind. Lily showed up at my place 2 days later. It was late, past midnight, but I saw her car pull up from my window. She sat there for a while, just staring at the dashboard, like she was rehearsing something in her head. When she finally stepped out, she looked worse than I expected. Hair a little too messy, face drawn, shoulders slumped. She was used to controlling the room, flashing a smile that made people think she had it all together. That wasn't working for her anymore. I didn't make it easy. I let her knock twice before opening the door, standing there in the frame, blocking her way in. She hesitated. Vin. I waited. She sighed, arms crossing like she was bracing herself. Can we talk? I let a beat pass before stepping back just enough. 5 minutes. She slipped inside, her perfume faint under the sin of stress and regret. I leaned against the counter, watching as she paced the room like she was looking for a version of our life that didn't exist anymore. You ruined me, she finally said, turning to face me. I raised an eyebrow. I ruined you? She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. My job. My reputation. I lost everything because of you. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You lost everything because you gambled with something you couldn't afford to lose. Her jaw tightened. I made a mistake. No. I corrected, voice steady. You made a choice. Over and over again. She ran a hand through her hair, looking away. I wasn't happy, Vin. You shut me out. You were always at that damn poker table, always thinking 10 steps ahead, like life was just one big game. I pushed off the counter, crossing my arms. So your solution was to run off with some broke artist? That was your fix. She exhaled sharply. I didn't plan for it to happen. Yeah. I tilted my head. That's what people say when they don't want to own up to what they did. Silence stretched between us. She looked down, voice quieter now. I didn't come here to fight. Then why are you here? She hesitated. I don't know. I guess I thought. She trailed off, like she couldn't even say it. I gave her nothing. Just waited. Finally, she let out a shaky breath, looking up at me. Is there any way back from this? I studied her, taking in the tired eyes, the slump in her shoulders, the way she twisted her wedding ring like she still wasn't sure if she should take it off or keep up the act. Then I reached into a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and set it on the counter between us. Divorce papers, I said. Already signed. She blinked, staring at them. You were never going to be happy with me, Lily, I said, voice even. And I sure as hell won't waste my time with someone who looks for an escape every time life gets hard. She swallowed hard, fingers gripping the edge of the envelope. For a second, I thought she might try to argue, but then her shoulders sagged. She knew. She'd known from the moment she walked in. I walked to the door and opened it. Take care of yourself. She hesitated for just a moment before picking up the envelope and walking past me. She didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her, and just like that, it was over. I stood there for a while, listening to the quiet. Then I grabbed a bottle from the shelf, poured myself a drink, and sat down at the table. I didn't feel angry. Didn't feel relieved, either. Just done. I picked up the cards in front of me, shuffling them slow. A fresh deck. A new game. Time to move forward. I didn't waste time looking back. Some men get stuck in the past, replaying every mistake, every betrayal, letting it eat at them. That wasn't me. I'd made my move, played my hand, and walked away clean. A week after Lily left, I got a call from Jack Bailey, an old friend in law enforcement. We'd crossed paths plenty of times, sometimes on the right side of things, sometimes not. Vin, he said, his voice the same steady baritone it had always been. Got a proposition for you. I took a sip of coffee, leaning back in my chair. That's so? You ever think about putting that sharp mind of yours to better use? I smirked. Define better. He chuckled. I got a case on my desk. Some hotshot businessman crying fraud. Says he was taken for a ride by a guy running a long con. Problem is, this con artist's good. Doesn't leave a trail. Knows exactly when to cut and run. And you need what? A crash course in how to think like a guy who doesn't play fair. Something like that, Jack said. You see angles most don't. You read people. That's exactly what we need. I turned the idea over in my head. Jack let the silence stretch before adding, pays well. Keeps you busy. Might even keep you out of trouble. I laughed. I don't get into trouble, Jack. Trouble finds me. Then consider this a way to stay one step ahead of it. I glanced at the whiskey glass on my desk, still sitting where I left it the night Lily walked out. The past was done. Time to build something new. All right, I said. I'm listening. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room across from a man who thought he was too smart to get caught. I watched him fidget, tap his fingers against the table, try to keep his face blank. He thought he had control. He thought if he stuck to his story, he could bluff his way through it. Amateur. I leaned forward, letting my silence stretch, letting the tension settle into his bones. You ever play poker? I asked finally. The guy blinked. What? Poker, I repeated. You ever sit at a table, watch a man bet big when he doesn't have the cards? He licked his lips. Yeah, I guess. You know the biggest mistake those guys make? I asked, tilting my head. He didn't answer, but I saw his throat bob. They think they can keep the bluff going forever, I said, my voice calm. They don't realize that once you see the tell, once you spot the shake in their hand, the flicker in their eye, it's over. The moment you know what to look for, they're done. He swallowed hard. I let a slow smile stretch across my face. And buddy, I've been watching you for 5 minutes, and I already know you're holding nothing. That was the beginning. The first of many. Turns out, catching men in their own lies was just as satisfying as taking their money at the table. Maybe even more. But work wasn't the only thing that needed fixing. There was one other thing I had to set straight. Molly. My daughter had been quiet through everything. She hadn't yelled, hadn't asked questions, just stayed in her room with her headphones in, shutting the world out. I let her be. But silence doesn't fix things. Action does. So one evening, I knocked on her door and leaned against the frame. Pack a bag. She looked up from her bed, raising an eyebrow. What? We're going on a trip. She hesitated. Where? I shrugged. Haven't decided yet. We'll figure it out on the way. For a second, I thought she'd argue, tell me she had school, friends, a life here. But then something shifted in her expression. Curiosity, maybe. The same restless streak I'd always had. She shut her laptop. Give me 10 minutes. 2 days later, we were on the road, the '69 Cadillac DeVille humming beneath us, the open highway stretching ahead. Molly sat in the passenger seat, feet propped on the dash, flipping through a playlist. This is kind of weird, she said after a while. What is? She glanced at me. You. Doing the whole, dad thing. I smirked. What, you thought I didn't know how? She laughed, shaking her head. I don't know. You've always been. Vin. Not exactly the PDA meeting type. Yeah, well, I said, adjusting the rearview mirror. PTA meetings aren't my scene. But road trips? Those I can do. She stared out the window, watching the blur of trees and roadside diners. Where are we even going? Vegas. She shot me a look. Seriously. I nodded. Gotta teach you something important. She snorted. How to gamble? How to read people, I corrected. How to know when someone's full of it before they even open their mouth. She considered that, then nodded slowly. Sounds useful. It is. Silence settled, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that meant something was being built, something real. I didn't have all the answers. Hell, I probably never would. But I knew one thing, life was all about the hands you played. And this time, I wasn't just playing for myself. I was playing to win. Vegas was the same as I remembered. Flashing lights, the smell of money and desperation in the air, men in suits pretending they weren't about to lose their shirts at the tables. The house always won, but the ones who stuck around long enough to understand the game still thought they had a chance. Molly walked a few steps ahead of me, taking it all in, as sharp the way mine had always been at her age. The kid had a good head on her shoulders, too smart for her own good, probably. That could get a person into trouble if they didn't learn early how to control it. You ever been inside a casino before? I asked. She smirked. You mean legally? I shook my head, laughing. Fair point. We stopped outside the Bellagio, watching the fountain shoot into the air in perfect rhythm. Molly leaned against the railing, arms crossed, thinking. So, what's the lesson? She asked. I glanced at the people streaming in and out of the casino doors, the ones chasing something they'd never catch. You see that guy? I nodded toward a man in an expensive suit, walking fast, checking his watch every few seconds. Lost big, trying to make it back. The watch tells you he had money once. The way he's gripping his wallet tells you he's running out. She followed my gaze, studying him. And that one. She pointed toward a woman in a tight dress, laughing too hard at something a man in a cheap blazer said. I tilted my head. Professional. Works the floor, finds the lonely ones. She'll keep him buying drinks all night. Maybe more, if the price is right. Molly exhaled, shaking her head. Jesus. Lesson 1, I said. Most people will tell you exactly who they are if you know how to watch. She looked up at me then, really looked, like she was seeing something for the first time. Is that why you weren't surprised when Mom, she stopped, hesitating? I didn't let her fumble it. Yeah. She nodded, understanding settling in. You knew. I saw it coming, I admitted. Doesn't mean it didn't piss me off. She turned back to the fountains, watching the water rise and fall. Did you ever love her? The question should have been harder than it was. I let it sit, let the truth settle in my chest before answering. Yeah, once. But love's not enough when someone's always looking for the exit. She was quiet for a long time before finally saying, I don't think I ever really knew her. I sighed. Not sure she knew herself. Another stretch of silence, this one comfortable. Then Molly smirked. So, if this was a poker game, what kind of player would she be? I grinned. One who bets big on the wrong hand and doesn't know when to fold. Molly laughed. Sounds about right. We stayed there a little longer, watching the lights, letting the city buzz around us. 3 months later, I got word through the grapevine that Jason had popped up in some nowhere town in New Mexico, trying to start fresh. Good for him. At least he was smart enough to stay gone. As for Lily, she was still in Atlantic City, working some lower-level marketing job, reputation in shambles. I figured she'd land on her feet eventually. People like her always found some way to convince the world they deserved another shot. Didn't matter to me. I wasn't looking back. Jack had thrown enough cases my way to keep me busy, and business was good. Liars were everywhere, and there was always someone willing to pay to have them exposed. I had more money in my pocket than I needed, a new kind of thrill that didn't involve cards, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing anything. One night, sitting at a quiet bar after a long day, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the counter. I looked the same, lean, sharp, the same well-worn suit and hat. But something was different. A little more ease in my posture, a little less weight pressing down on me. I raised my glass in a quiet toast to no one in particular. The house always wins. And I was the house.